I don't know about you. I'm saying no all day, all day long. And it's exhausting. And if it's exhausting for me, I can only imagine what it feels like to my daughter to be hearing it all the time. So trying to come from this place of like, does it have to be a no? And sometimes it does, right? Safety, like there are certain things that is a non-negotiable. It's bedtime, right? Like, no, we're not having ice cream for dinner, whatever it is, right? Certain things are a no. But I think as parents, the biggest thing I see is shutting down things that maybe don't have to be shut down. And I think when we save our no's for when we need them, they become more meaningful. Our children are more likely to actually like heed that advice and heed those no's. It also is just more joyful for us. And I think that's a key part of getting through parenting is finding joy. And I think our children feel a lot more seen and understood.
Hi, friends, and welcome back to Life Intended. Life Intended is a podcast that explores what it means to be true to yourself and live an authentic and purposeful life. Each episode explores my guest's version of personal growth, self-discovery, and the pursuit of becoming the best version of themselves, as well as how to find joy in the journey. So thank you to so many of you who have been listening. Before we get started today, if I can just ask or remind you to subscribe to the podcast on whatever app you're listening and leave a rating and review. Ratings and reviews are the single best way for new listeners to find the show and for me to continue to grow it. So if you've done so, thank you very much. And if not, please take just a second to do that. Okay, so now on to what you're here for today. I'm excited to be talking with and sharing so much great conversation and info from my guest, Jill Lerman. Jill is a play and parenting coach, early childhood educator, play expert, and a mom to a toddler. She empowers overwhelmed parents and caretakers to connect and engage with their little ones through simple invitations to play and create to help make parenting feel more joyful and manageable. She also serves as a play expert and consultant for brands where she teaches classes, runs workshops, consults on product development, and provides play ideas. A mom herself, Jill knows how difficult getting through the day can be, which is why, above all else, her approach makes it easy for parents to facilitate interaction and play that supports development. She loves helping families create an environment and culture that sees children as capable from their earliest days, that values creativity, playfulness, bonding, and connection. To learn more about Jill and Jilly Beans, check out her Instagram at JillyBeansNYC and her website, jillybeansnyc.com, as well as in the show notes, I've got those links and some additional resources from Jill. So welcome to the show, Jill. I'm really excited for our conversation today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So I know I kind of just talked about who you are as an expert and an expert in play. I'm excited about this because I am a mom of a toddler. And although I do love to play with her, I know play can be hard for a lot of parents and families, toddler through you'll speak more to this, I know, but through whatever age that play is still continues to be very important. So tell us a little bit about like your background and how you got started as a play expert.
Yeah, sure. So I worked in early childhood education for 15 plus years. I was a preschool teacher in Manhattan in private preschool and also taught in the parenting centers of those schools. So I taught the toddler preschool class and then also caretaker and me, mommy and me classes for babies and then the young toddlers that many of which then entered into the school when they were old enough. And play just is magic. And I would just see again and again how much learning and exploration and connection to the world around them and processing of feelings was happening for these children from infancy through their play, and how things could just come alive at their hands, and how they could use materials in ways that I couldn't even imagine when I put things out. Which then inspired me to start teaching my own play-based classes outside of the classroom, where I would help families learn how they could facilitate experiences like the ones I was creating in the classroom, in their home, using the things they already had. How can we make the most of the toys we have, the household items we have, and set them up in new and unique ways to see more engaged play happening? And I did that in people's homes, in stores, play spaces in and around Manhattan. And then the pandemic happened. And like so many, everything changed. My model as I knew it could no longer exist. I was not going to be going around with shared materials to people's homes. I also found I was pregnant the week New York City shut down, March of 2020. So there was just a lot of unknowns in and uncertainty. But I saw an opportunity because I recognized that people were spending more time at home than maybe ever. They were their child's teacher, their child's caretaker. They were also working full-time or part-time, many of them, and were really looking for support and ideas. So I started sharing things similar to what I was doing in my classes, but over social media. Which grew into the business that I'm now running today, working with families one-on-one to support them in their play and their parenting and coaching, doing content creation and product development with brands and working in partnership with them. And also my monthly membership where I share simple play ideas, again, using the things you already have around in ways that maybe you didn't think of, as well as offering classes on play and developmental topics. So people really have that foundational knowledge to support play at home. And all that started from kind of this forced pivot in the pandemic.
Yeah, I love that. What really appeals to me is like the simplicity of it and the using things that you already have. I think that, pre having a child, I thought, I'll be the mom who like cooks everything and makes everything from scratch and creates all of these like arts and crafts. And I think really anybody who knows me would be like, if there's any mom who's going to do that, it's Kelly. Yeah. However, like that's just not the reality. Like although there are times when I do those things, like I'm not setting up like an arts and crafts station every weekend because I don't have the time. So talk a little bit about like what that looks like to keep it really simple and also like, why is play so important as a part of a child's development?
Yeah, it's such a great question. So I think that's a great place to start. Play really, I believe, as an educator, is the best tool that we have to support our children across every area of their growth. So not just in terms of their physical growth, right? Their large muscle groups, their small muscle groups, their cognitive growth, their language skills, but also, the emotional growth that comes from, certainly opportunities for creativity, for problem solving. Play is an opportunity to help build resilience, build independence. And I think there's something, a little scary that is happening right now with this shift in the world, all this access to technology that we didn't have in generations past, where we're kind of moving away from these play-based childhoods that used to be kind of the norm and the standard. But our children need, not, even want or crave, need for their development, that playtime, that open-ended opportunities to explore, to test out different things, to really grow and develop into the people that they're meant to be. And I think that, again, I'm not here we can talk about screen time and all that stuff. I'm not here to be the screen police. I think there can be value in screen time. I think it's all about the boundaries, that we set around it and kind of how we approach it. But I do think that for many, it's become a replacement for what play once was in childhood. And I think it's really important that we still make that time and prioritize play. Every expert that colleague of mine that I work with, whether it's speech pathologists, physical therapists, occupational therapists, pediatricians, I could go on. It always comes back to play. Always, always, always. And I feel like there's just so much, even in what to us as adults from the outside kind of could look purposeless, that is actually quite purposeful for our children. And they need that time to work through these different things through play opportunities. In terms of, what you were touching on with the simplicity, can relate to this so much because what I thought was simple when I was teaching these classes, when I was in the preschool classroom, took on a whole new meaning to me when I actually became a parent myself. Because I love, a good sensory bin, and that's kind of, setting play is like a love language for me. So there are things and kind of creative things that I love to get into that maybe are the next, step up, let's say, from the most simple. But that being said, once I became a mom, I was like, oh, no. Like, we got to pare this back. I don't have the bandwidth for a complicated setup. I don't have the bandwidth for an involved and complicated cleanup. And furthermore, what I kind of realized or was reminded of, because, this knowledge was in there already from the classroom days, was that it doesn't need to be complicated to be meaningful. And I was kind of adding that pressure to myself, and that it was not necessary for my daughter to get the value and all of the benefits that we mentioned out of the experience. So knowing that and understanding that, I really wanted to help other families understand that too. Like, hey, this doesn't have to be the Pinterest perfect thing. This doesn't have to be, that adorable craft that you saw. And in fact, I'd even venture to say, we don't want it to be. We want it to look like, the child approached this in their own unique way. We don't want there to be a one way to do it or a quote right way to do it. We want more of a process-based experience. And so that means that the most productive and engaged play or art or, sensory experience, whatever it might be, is going to be messy. And I don't mean that necessarily. I mean, it could be messy, like your kid's covered in paint or mud, right? And there's value in that too. But I'm talking about messy, like this is not going to look particularly organized or together 98% of the time. You might look at this and kind of be like, oh my gosh, it looks like a bomb went off in here. That to me is a good sign. So I just want to throw that out there as well. I think we're often fed, especially in this age of social media, these things that look perfect. And then we try to set it out and it's either unsuccessful, our child has no interest in it, or they do it, but it's not coming out the way the person showed it. And then we're kind of feeling like we failed or they failed and we're kind of adjusting it. And it shouldn't be about that. And that's kind of what I'm hoping to get out there to families.
So what are some good examples of what that looks like in reality?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think a lot of this is going to vary by age and stage, right? Because some of this is just dependent on where our children are at in terms of their play skills and kind of, what developmental skills they have so far. But, for purposes of today, let's talk about a toddler, right? Because we both are toddler moms. So what a simple prompt, I call them, because I feel like it's that little something to kind of get your child started, and then they take it from there. So a simple prompt for a toddler could be, maybe we want to think about what they're interested in first and foremost, because children at any age, no matter what age your child is, if you're listening to this, they're always going to be more likely to play for longer stretches of time and be more into it when it follows something that they're currently into. The same way that we would, right? We want to take part and spend more time in things that we enjoy. And our kids are no different. So for, let's say your child is a vehicle lover. They're super into their cars and their trucks. Let's say this same child is also really into bath time. They could be in the bath for an hour, if they weren't totally pruny and they had to go to bed and you had to take them out, they'd stay in there forever. So when I hear that, I'm like, okay, an amazing simple prompt for that child could be, putting a bowl of warm water, some plastic vehicles, right? Because things that could get wet, next to it. Maybe we put out a sponge or a washcloth and just see what they do, right? Now we've recreated this opportunity. The idea in my mind when I put that out is oh, maybe this is going to become like a car wash, right? Or give the cars a bath or something of that nature. But what's amazing about an open-ended prompt is that child can make that into anything they want. Maybe that's how they start. Maybe once they've the water is out and has been dumped and it's on the towels, whatever, maybe now the bowl gets overturned and this bowl becomes a hill that the cars are driving up and down. Or maybe it becomes a mountain, or maybe we now are going to take out some blocks and build on top of it. And now it's like a tunnel or a garage or a bridge. Maybe the washcloth becomes a blanket and the cars are going to sleep. I mean, I'm just thinking off the top of my head here, but the idea is, what are some things that we can put out together in partnership with each other? And again, super simple. These are things everyone has, right? Not anything like crazy you have to go out and buy, that can be used in a multitude of ways, right? It's not a one and done. It's not like all right, we did this, now it's over, because how we see these elongated stretches are that there are multiple play possibilities. And then again, coming back to, does it follow the child's current interests? So immediately they get more intrigued. Another great toddler one that just works, honestly, even as children get older, well into the elementary school years, building challenges. If you have a child that's really into their magnetic tiles or their blocks or whatever. But until we get to a certain age, and honestly, even once we get to a certain age, it can be hard to self-start. A lot of children need a little bit of support, and then they'll take it and run. So this is not about us doing it for them, but rather kind of opening up a door that then they can take it to the next place. So I love if your child is into a certain character, from a show, from a book, and you have figurines, or they're really into their animals right now, or their car, whatever it might be, and they're putting that out with the building material. And then we present some kind of challenge. I wonder if you could build a barn for these horses. I wonder if you could build a castle only in blue for Elsa. Right? We're taking this thing that they're super into. We're presenting a really simple idea to kind of get them going. And then from there, they will take it and they will run. It'll go in all these other directions that you never even imagined possible. But it's just that little something. Sometimes this could also look like putting out a toy in a place they're not used to seeing it. Like, don't underestimate the novelty of like your favorite thing that you usually play with in your bedroom showing up in the kitchen while mom is getting dinner ready, or like showing up on the stairs, or taking an inside toy outside. Like that's like, for a child, to us, it's this simple, nothing tweak. But for a child, this opens up like a whole new door of possibilities. So I hope that gives at least some idea to the kinds of ideas I'm talking about. In my membership, this is like what I share, 15 to 20 ideas broken down by relative age and developmental stage, but that simple, and like written like a recipe, like you need this and this. Step 1, put it here. Step 2, do this. Step 3, they play. Essentially.
That's
to get you going,
Yeah. So a couple of quick questions before we move on from that. So in your membership, like when you say broken down by age, what ages do you provide information like this for?
So it's a great question. I like to say that the membership is most geared toward children roughly 0 to 7 years old. And I say 0 because there are ideas from infancy, from newborn stage. However, it is designed in such a way that these play principles are impactful well past that age. And these foundational play skills and these ideas, and they're designed to be open-ended enough that they can work as your children grow. They're also designed to be open-ended enough that if you have siblings at home, these are things that the children can do together. And part of what I talk about in the membership is like, I give what I call pro tips, but little tweaks that are like, hey, want to get your older child involved in this, baby activity? Try it like this. Or setting this up for multiples, try it like this. But the idea being that these are things that really can grow with your child, and again, are open-ended enough that they're going to approach it in the way that their current skill set is able to. So for even a child, let's say past 7 years old, these ideas that are listed in like the preschool and beyond category, your child can do, but they're just going to be taking it next level. It's going to be a little more complex. I give ideas for different processes you can layer in. And also the other thing I want to mention is I do break it down by relative age because I think that's helpful, but it really is more about developmental skills. I also talk about in the membership, like, hey, if your child's doing this, because the thing is like, you could have a 6-month-old that is sitting up unassisted, that's crawling. You could also have a 6-month-old that just started rolling and isn't doing those things. So the play ideas and the way you approach them might look different, even though both kids are 6 months. So I really try to give that information there as well. So you can kind of figure out, okay, this is what's appropriate for my child, even if it's in this section.
Yeah. Okay. That was one question. Another question I have is, are these activities designed to involve the parent with the child or to encourage independent play? Like, talk a little bit about what the role is with the parent and the child.
Such a great question.
Yeah, I know. Like a lot of parents, a challenge is they don't have a lot of time to play or, like they're trying to do other things. So they're trying to get their child to do something.
Yeah.
But, what's the importance of that role of the parent being involved?
Oh my gosh, such a great question. I have a couple of thoughts that I want to make sure that I hit on. The first thing is that, of course, play is a way that we can connect with our children, right? Certainly for me, like I said earlier, it is the love language. I get a lot of joy from being a part of that experience from time to time, not always. And I think that, if it is a source of joy and connection for you, then you want to, you do want to be involved. I think what we want to think about, though, so independent play, and I think we'll talk probably more about this as our conversation goes on, that's a huge part of the work I do supporting families. And the reason for this, I think, one is people are trying to see more of it, but often it's complicated how. And if you're someone that's listening to this and you're like, I feel caught in like an unsustainable cycle of constantly feeling like I have to entertain my child, or if you are someone who's leaning into more screen time than you wish to be, independent play can really be a tool that supports you. I know for me personally, as a mom who is running my own business and I'm also the primary caretaker for my daughter, I don't have full-time childcare. I count on independent play to run my business. So I just want to kind of throw that out there. I also think sometimes independent play gets a bad rep because parents feel guilty, or neglectful in some way. So I want to just start with setting the record straight on that. Independent play is incredibly beneficial for your child. It is a necessity for children. And even with the best intentions, when adults get involved in our child's play, we change it. Simple as that. And the reason is because our skill sets are not equal, right? Like I'm not a 3-year-old. So the way that I approach materials is going to be different than the way my daughter does. And my ideas are different than my daughter's. And automatically, when I'm involved in the play, it changes from the way she would play on her own or the way she would play with a peer. So that's not to say that there isn't value in the connection that comes with playing from your child. But when you think about it like that, you're like, oh gosh, well, I want them to have the benefits of all those things we spoke about earlier, like the creativity and the problem solving and all of that stuff. And really the best way to do that is in this independent playtime where and child directed play, they're really the ones that are holding the reins, that are in control of where the play goes and how it's going. So in terms of our role, I like to think of the best role for the parent as being I call it an active observer. You're involved, you're present, because I do think our children know and feel the difference between we're actually in this with them and we're kind of we're doing other things, we're scrolling on our phone, we're, whatever it might be. So we want to be present. And if that's present, this is a time where we're engaging together, that we really are present in that. And if we're present, they're playing independently and I'm sitting on the couch and maybe I'm just there. It doesn't mean that I'm not doing something else, like perhaps working or reading my book, or this is a time where scrolling is completely reasonable. I think, if you're doing that, but we're there, we're within earshot and eye shot, and we're present. And I say this because this is really more for young children specifically. And when you're building independent play skills, the vast majority of young children cannot play separately from where their parent is. They want to be able to see you and hear you. They want to be able to check in. And so I think sometimes we have to reframe how we're imagining independent play, because to me, independent play often is my daughter is like 3 feet away,
Yeah.
right? But she's directing it. She's kind of engaging her own thing. She's the one in control and kind of, doing it. But I'm here. Like I might be here and on my computer, but I'm very much here and in this process. I also think another way that parents are involved are, when we talk about the prompts, I think that there's something incredibly connecting about your child's feeling seen by you, right? And like you put out this thing that's exactly what I'm into right now. You noticed that I'm really into filling up baskets and dumping it out. And you put out this exploration with all these different size things and containers. Like you see me, right? So even if that was put out with the intention of me then to be like, I'm going to do my work for a couple of minutes while you do your work, which is your play. And when I'm done, or when the timer goes off, or when, and we can get into kind of how you can set up independent play, but whatever it is that you're saying, then I can join you, or then we're going to go to the park, or then we're going to whatever. But I think that there's still a deep, deep connection in the feeling seen and cared for enough that someone set up this thing for me, right? So I think that's another thing we have to think about as parents, that is connection. And the last thing I'll say for now, and I know we'll continue to get into it, is that play is just one of many ways that we can connect with our children. And I'm saying this to you as someone who I help people with play for a living. So of course I see the value and the, why play is important, both with your child and in an independent play capacity. But I also think that sometimes we're led to believe that playing with our child is the only way that we can really connect with them and speak their language. And if we're not, then we're a bad parent, or if we don't enjoy it, then we're terrible. They're going to feel neglected. They're going to feel unloved. There's this quote that I'm constantly seeing come up in my social media. That's something like, when a child has a bad day, they don't say blah, blah, blah. They say, play with me. Or I don't know if you've seen this. And I get the intention, but I think that it makes a lot of people feel bad. And I feel like, play, yes, that's one source, but so is going for a walk together. So is, preparing a meal or a snack together. Bath time and different caretaking tasks can be deep points of connection. And play is just one thing. So if we've spent all day, or great chunks of the day filling our child's cup with all of these different points of connection, and now it's playtime and that's their time while we're doing whatever it is that we need to in that moment, that is completely reasonable. And that doesn't make a child feel unloved or neglected. It's just a different framing of what play is. I hope that answers that question. It's kind of a complicated level question to attack.
I think I don't think I've seen that quote, but I think I understand the intent. It's basically like if your child is maybe upset, probably what you need to do is stop and be present. And it's using play as the example, but which
that's right.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of complicated layers there, and I'm not an expert in children. But to build on your point, I've also read and heard, children they don't have as defined of a definition of play as we do. So you have so much latitude in what you introduce to them as play. And a lot of children like to have responsibility and to be helpers. And so, involving them in prepping a meal or folding laundry, they don't really know the difference. They don't know that folding laundry is not a game. Like you can kind of make it into one or make it into something that's fun for them that also lets you focus on the tasks that you need to while involving them, bonding with them.
Yes. And I think that I would even venture to say, and I'm thinking, again, I keep coming back to toddlers, but this is really true of children, period. They want to feel like valued members of your family system. They want to feel empowered. They want to feel involved. And I think a huge part of my parenting personally is involving my daughter and things like that. And furthermore, I don't know if you have we have a toddler tower, which is one of the best things I've ever purchased and spent money on in parenting, hands down. But my daughter, from the time she was standing up unassisted, one and change, could really solidly stand, has been at counter height with us and wanting to be involved. And there are so many ways that they can be involved. Now she has some basic, she has child safe knives and she can chop but even at the very beginning, being able to sprinkle things into the mixing bowl, helping with stirring and pouring. And she loved it. And she was more likely to try new foods when she was involved in the creation of making them. So there's so much value in those moments. And like you said, they're novel and they're fun. And what seems mundane to us, not mundane to our children. So it is so much more about the connection and the presence than it is about the task at hand per se.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. We have a toddler tower too. For those who may not be familiar, it's like one of those little ladder square things where they can climb up and stand and be at counter height, and you don't have to worry about them falling off of a ladder.
They're enclosed and safely in there.
Yeah. We have one too. And I know, it's fun to think about having your child cook with you. And then it's another thing when they want to crack the eggs and it's it makes everything take 10 times longer. But I do think that you can involve them, and even letting them watch or talking to them about what you're doing, I find can be really entertaining.
Absolutely.
Especially for children who are really curious and they want to be held while you're doing everything so they can see.
Yes, I know. Yeah. Then if you're that parent, the toddler tower is your answer also for the sake of your arm and your back. As your child grows, I'm what used to be pretty easy is now becoming more and more difficult. And that was a great time to kind of lean into it.
For sure. Yeah. So what else about play? How does it, I know you've mentioned resiliency and problem solving, but what are some things, either ways that you can introduce play or the value of play in developing those particular skills?
Yeah. So I think, for one, let's think about, I'd love to talk a little bit about some of what you were saying earlier about how play doesn't always look like the way we imagine it to be. I think that's really, really important because one, for the reasons that you mentioned, but also because I think it helps us reframe as adults to look and realize oh, maybe they actually are playing. What to me, I didn't think was, I think we often are oh, stacking blocks, right? Taking care of a doll. Yes, of course. But those are, just some ways, and particularly with babies, with toddlers. Oh my gosh, toddler play, especially in the earliest stages, often to the outside person might not look like play at all. It's dumping and banging and knocking things down and picking them back up and knocking them down again. We could get more deeply into it. I don't want to go too far because it's kind of a whole other tangent, but schema, which is essentially different, almost obsessive behaviors that we see in every child across the globe, no matter who they are, no matter what their race or socioeconomic status. These are patterns that we see in every single child. And some of them don't really seem like play. For example, positioning is a schema. And that's when a child, if you've ever noticed your toddler lining things up very meticulously, along, a path and or they're lining up markers, they're lining up crayons. When you bring out their food, the bowl, the cup, everything has to be in a line. This actually is a play pattern. But it doesn't necessarily look like play in the traditional sense. Another is trajectory. So this is when, if you've ever had, and I know we all have, the experience of your child throwing their plate, constantly throwing their plate, and you pick it back up, or they're throwing their toy out of the stroller. I'm thinking about it now, so triggering for me, even knowing what I know. I was oh my gosh, I pick it up, she's throwing it out again. But this actually is something really important that's happening for our children developmentally, because they're in that schema, they're understanding cause and effect. right? They're experimenting with gravity and early physics. There are all these things happening in their brain through this repetitive action of schema. And that for them in those periods of time is play. So, there are 9 schema that are the most commonly observed. I'm kind of obsessed with this topic. So if people end up following along on my page, you'll learn a lot more about it. But this in toddlerhood and even in like the later stage of your baby's first year is often how they're playing and how they're engaging with the world. It's why we might see a child around the 10-month mark, not, stacking their blocks in the traditional sense or their rings, their stacking ring toy, but instead banging 2 of them together, or taking the, ring stacker and dumping all the rings off of it and not putting them back on. Right. So these are kind of play patterns that when we start to have some foundational knowledge about development, we're like, oh, that actually is how they're engaging. That for them is developing cause of effect, understanding my action has this reaction. It's problem solving. When children are like around the 1-year mark, really 1 to 2 years old is when they're really mastering this, but what fits in what containers. Have you ever noticed, like, did your daughter go through a period where she was just obsessed with like putting things into containers and dumping them out, or mostly dumping, truly. But like food storage containers, right? So this is like a thing every child goes through from one time or another. And often it's because they're developing all these skills of like spatial awareness, what fits where, right? Again, that problem solving, understanding the relationship of objects in space to one another. Again, that trajectory of like how something falls when I drop it hard or I dump it hard, this happens and the ball rolls farther away. If I do it softly, it stays here. All of these things are making very vital connections in the brain. And then as we grow, and then of course there are more obvious things like strengthening the small muscle groups in the hands, right? The precision it takes to pick something up and put it down. It's different mobile skills that are happening as our child is moving toward things when they're learning to crawl, walk, jump, etc. So there's all of those skill building things. But the things that I think are maybe less obvious and like less tangible are these things like the resilience and the independence. And that's something, one, that just comes from continued opportunities to try, to experiment, to get something, to happen in the way they want it to, whatever that looks like in their age and stage. So as our children grow, maybe it is that stacking of blocks and they want to make the tower this big, but it keeps falling, right? So of course, there's the more tangible value of like understanding balance, right? Understanding, gravity, like those things, the precision of physically putting the blocks on top of each other. But the resilience comes in it fell. Oh, that's so frustrating. Deep breath. Okay, I'm going to try again. Right. And this is also a place where we talk about the role of the adult, where that becomes really vital, because they do need some of that scaffolding and that support, and that, not the solving the problem for them. Right. Because I think that often is the instinct, is like, because I can see as the adult exactly what needs to happen for that to stay up. But instead seeing like oh gosh, that looks so frustrating. You're trying to get it to stay up and it keeps falling down. I wonder what we can do, right? So now I'm providing the scaffolding for one, I'm validating the emotion of like, that's annoying, right? That's frustrating, and helping them identify the feeling they're experiencing. But also I'm modeling the taking a breath, because when something's frustrating and we're getting stressed or anxious, to recenter ourselves, right? So we're modeling that in that moment. And then we're presenting like, how do we solve this? What can we do? We're opening the floor to something's not working. What's something different we can try, right? That's a life skill. That's not just building blocks. That's every single problem that we're going to encounter as we grow. I, as an adult, do not have a very big frustration tolerance, I can tell you. And I find myself kind of using the tools that I instill in my daughter and kind of bringing myself back to those basics to get through stressful moments, right? And kind of coming back to the like, okay, this is not ideal. I'm feeling really frustrated about this. It's okay to feel frustrated, but what can we do? So that's one thing. I also think it's an opportunity for, again, using the same scenario just because I think it makes it easier, but how disappointing it feels when things are not going the way that we want them to. I mean, what person at any age cannot, relate to that in some facet of like, I had this expectation. What's happening is not hitting what that expectation was. I'm so disappointed and sad. And how do I get through that? And play allows so many opportunities for that. In this block example, for our child in this small world that is theirs, that is that deep. The block not staying up the way they wanted to feels that deeply wounding to many children and that deeply disappointing. So giving them the tools to work through that disappointment and find a way are the same things that then they can use, down the line when other things are disappointing. They didn't make the team. Their friend said something that hurt them. They're heartbroken. There are so many things in life where things don't go the way that we hoped, and we have to find a path forward while still acknowledging the deep hurt and disappointment. And there are constant opportunities in play for that to happen. And that, to me, above all else, is maybe the most important thing that play allows. And we don't even have to necessarily, set something out with the intention of that happening. That's just a natural byproduct of these child-led experiences.
Yeah. So that leads me to a lot more questions.
Yeah.
And I know that you said like you're not the screen police, and I don't want to go down that path either, but like what's the biggest difference in how children learn through play versus how they learn through like watching play on screens?
Okay, it's a really good question. There's a lot of research, and if anybody listening to this, like, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to send you things. I'm someone like, I like information. I want to see it and read it and understand it before I make my decision. And to me, it's pretty black and white when you look at the research around screen time, that it actually is changing a child's brain when there's too much of it happening. Now, some of this, there are a lot of variables. So the first thing that I'll say is that, a lot of this depends on what our child is watching. So some types of screen time are more active, certainly like separate from like something like a show that your child's watching, something like FaceTiming with someone, right? Is responsive, it's active. So that's not going to be counted into necessarily the group of screen time that I'm talking about. And the same is true in programming. There are shows that are more kind of, require more kind of responsiveness from your child than others. I also would be looking at, even when I think about the things that I allow my daughter to watch, the pace, something that's flashing back and forth a lot and has like a lot of boom, boom, bang, 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 a lot of noise, a lot of flashing, a lot of switch back and forth. It's very stimulating, as opposed to something that's a little bit slower in nature. And I think when you start to pay attention to that, you will see the difference. But some of this I would tell parents is like, every child is different. Every child's stimulation tolerance is different. And the way that children respond to things is going to be different. So I would encourage you to just like keep a log, even over the course of a couple of days. And you'll notice you're going to start to see differences. You will see differences between when your child is on a phone and a tablet versus the TV. You will see differences between they watched this or this and what it does to their mood and their behavior. You're going to get a lot of information from that specific to your child. Also, how much did they watch? What time of day did they watch? All of these things factor in to what ultimately is going to be, I think, the appropriate amount of screen time that's right for your child and your family. And I also want to just say, look, different times are going to have different rules. Child sick, probably going to be upping the screen time, right? You're traveling, might be having more screen time than usual. But these are things that I'm just as a general rule that we can kind of look at when we're figuring out what kind of feels right for our family in this season. But in terms of like the difference, it's just a lot less active. And the thing with like screens just in general, and I like worry about this and almost see it in myself, the dopamine hits like, from that like on Instagram as you get older. But for our children of like the bam, the boom, the things, the bright color, the stuff, it is almost like the same as like a drug in excess, right? So it's just, you can't then compete with like the slower pace or the problem solving. And I think the biggest thing that a lot of the research is showing, it changes kind of the connections in the brain so that then we're more looking for that response in the brain as opposed to the one of kind of the working things out ourselves and the thing falling and having to rework it. So then what happens is our children don't have as much patience for working through these moments. They're getting frustrated much more easily. And then as they grow and we're seeing things like they're trying to learn to write their letters or, different things that come with school, the focus is not there. The tolerance to work through as we're perfecting a skill is not there because the brain patterns have changed. So I hope I'm articulating that well enough. That's not like my, really like where my research and expertise is, but it is related. So I have some knowledge of it. But I think, that's the core difference. So it's not that like all screen time is evil. It's just that we really want to make sure that it's not becoming a replacement for these other opportunities.
Yeah. So that was one question that I was thinking of. And I think that's a great way to look at it. But the other one I was thinking at is like, is there like a formula or a balance? Like how much independent play does a child need? Plus how much interaction with other children their age? Plus, in like play with a parent? Like what is that balance of different types of play look like?
Yeah, gosh. And I wish I had like the magic number. I think a lot of this is going to change as a child grows. So for example, in our child's earliest years, the interactions that are going to be the most beneficial are really going to come from the independent interaction and the interaction with the caretaker. We're not really seeing so much peer-to-peer play happening until later. That doesn't mean they don't enjoy being around other children and that there isn't, benefit in that, but we're not really going to see that so much in the earliest years. I mean, even now, my daughter is 3 and change and is just kind of starting to get into that more interactive play now. I think often, from the time our kids are like a couple of months old, we're being told, oh, they need socialization. And like, from like a play perspective, I think that really, the real interactive play is going to come later. That doesn't mean there's not benefit to being out in the world and being around other parents, other kids. But I think that's important to note. And then as they get older, that becomes a really important piece of the puzzle, is that in peer-to-peer interaction. And, particularly I love the idea as children grow. I think about like when I was growing up and in the cul-de-sac we lived, there was kind of like a mixed age group. So we had a couple of older kids, a couple of younger kids, couple in the middle, and kind of all coming together to share ideas. And I feel like that's really where a lot of magic starts to happen as our kids grow. I also will say, I think that, and it hurts a little to say because I'm a parent and I'm like, oh gosh, this is going to be rough. But I think that in terms of play, as our children grow, it really becomes more about the independent play and the peer-to-peer play and less about our interaction. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't still play an incredibly important role, but I think in terms of our role in play, it really starts to shift as our children are growing. But I think that, independent play always is going to be, is to me, probably the most important thing to prioritize. And when people are looking for just like an idea in terms of the routine of their day, I would say thinking, and again, it depends on age and all these other factors, but as a general rule, just thinking that most of the play is that independent child-led play. Now that could also be independent play for like, let's say siblings, could be them together. It's more about your involvement being less active in it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But that's really going to be what we prioritize. And then I think finding these other opportunities to connect, through all the other ways. And it also is not an all or nothing, and it's not an always and a never. I think it's just about kind of thinking, okay, we want more of the time to be that. but that doesn't mean don't ever be involved. I think it's just about trying to figure out some balance in it, so it's not always being directed by you. Does that answer that question?
Yep, it sure does. And that is a really good segue into my next question, which is, how does this change, or does it even change, if you have an only child versus a child with siblings?
Oh, yeah. In terms of just play period, or
play period and like parent or caretaker involvement in play.
Yeah. So I think when it comes to sibling play, and this is something I support a lot of families in coaching, because sibling dynamics in play can be very tricky. It's also worth mentioning, though, that I also support a lot of parents of only children who have felt like they've become the default playmate. And kind of figuring out that. So I think there's things to say on both. In terms of sibling play, I really think that a parent's job is to, in that kind of overseeing capacity, and also to like maintain safety, particularly if a younger sibling is young, But I would say, like, for example, in my membership, a lot of the prompts that I share are really designed for sibling play purposes. And often the parent's role in that is going to be making sure everyone's body is safe, first and foremost. So that often means like, we want to make sure we don't have things that are hazardous. What's tricky is as children get older, the parts to their toys get smaller. I don't know if you're finding any of that now. So that can be a little difficult with the younger siblings. So we really want to be there in that capacity to be sure that everybody's safe. But I also think the adult role comes into play a lot, where when we have a baby, let's say in a preschool age child, just to throw out an example, and let's say we put out oversized Duplo blocks and we're playing together. And that's a great option because it's open-ended, where the baby might be banging two blocks together or knocking down a block tower. Some of the things we talked about, our preschool age child might be making complex structures, making a city, making a zoo, whatever they're, doing. But it's one thing that we can have out for them to interact together, but kind of approach in their own way. And that's a key part of sibling play. But part of a parent's job in this is also going to be, if you have a baby who's in that knocking down stage and that is their play right now, but they go and they swipe down Big Brother's building that he was just working on so hard, this is where some of the squabbles begin. And it can be really difficult because it's completely appropriate for the baby. But it's also completely understandable for the older child who is meticulously working to make this thing happen. So I think where a parent's role really comes in those situations is what we're setting out and making sure it's safe and open-ended and approachable for everyone. And then also negotiating these things and helping the children negotiate these things as they come up. So maybe in this case, that comes with the, oh, no, I won't let you knock down, Tom's tower. If you want to knock things down, I will build things for you over here. And it's going to take constant reinforcing of that boundary, but it will eventually stick. For our older child, maybe this looks like, I'm so sorry that happened. That is so frustrating. You're working so hard on it. I wonder if we can put this up on the table so that baby sister can't reach there. And that way your beautiful tower that you're working on will not be interrupted. Or maybe we don't offer that solution. Maybe it's what do you think we could do? Or where do you think we can place this so it would be harder for her to reach? So now that resilience, that problem solving, that collaboration, how do we work with other people who have different ideas? I mean, like, hello, this is like a major life skill, right? That is going to come into play again and again and again. And it all starts here. So I think our role is really in the facilitation, the figuring out how we can do this in a safe way. How can we encourage, opportunities to be doing things together, but still approaching it in a way that is appropriate for each child, I feel like is your main role there. And the thing is, as they grow, they're going to start taking those things and running with it. And your involvement is going to become less and less. Your need to supervise in that way is going to lessen and lessen till we're at the point that they're just kind of running off and doing their own thing. And like, mama gets a minute. But it all kind of starts there with your facilitation so that then they build the skills to be able to work through some of those things themselves, and also just for safety reasons. And then I think with the only child question, this is tricky. And look, I mean, right now, my daughter is an only child, and it's something I'm very aware of, that she doesn't have that built-in playmate, and now is just starting to really get into the age that she has that interest and is looking for some of that. So I think I'm not a replacement for a peer. And I'm not a replacement for a sibling for all the reasons that we mentioned earlier, that we're not equals. So I really try to maintain my role in play with all the different skills that we've talked about, and kind of creating these opportunities for her to play independent play with something special I set out, or having family moments that are of open-ended creation where we all kind of approach it in our own way. But I'm not necessarily leading her through it. And then seeking out opportunities for her to have that time with other kids, and making sure there is, or she's also right now in a camp program. So I know she's getting a lot of that there, making sure that that's kind of built into it. But I do think it's important for parents to know, if they are in that situation, that even if you were playing with your child every single time they asked, which for all the reasons we mentioned is not really sustainable for you and isn't really beneficial for them, you're not going to be the same as the things that they're getting from working with someone of a similar age and kind of playing and interacting with them. So we still want to make sure that we're finding opportunities to prioritize that, going to the local park, setting up a play date, making sure if they're in some kind of program that they're getting a lot of chances to explore that there.
Yeah. That's great. This has all been really great. We're coming up on time, but I did want to ask this question. So as you were talking about the baby and the preschool age child, what I see a lot happen in that situation, just in environments that I've been around, a lot of times it's talking to the preschool age child like they, your baby sister didn't know any better. They didn't mean to. It's almost like just deal with it type of mentality. So,
yes.
The way that you described handling it well, I think it just takes a little bit more thought and a little bit more patience. So do you have a list of common mistakes that people make, or a list of different way to approach these things, so maybe people can approach play in a more encouraging or less frustrating way for their kids?
Well, it's such a good question. And I appreciate your saying that. I think that, and look, there's truth to what you said, right? Because the baby doesn't know, the baby is learning. And I think there is value in saying to your child, she's still figuring this out. But the key piece that's missing from that is not also validating the emotion of your other child and their feelings and their needs in this situation. I think a mistake, I don't like to use the word mistake, but I feel like I'm not sure what something that comes up a lot, let's say, with parents that have multiple children, and where there are a lot of these sibling things that are coming up, is that we're only tending to one person. And very often it's the younger child. And there's reason why that's so. We have expectations that the older one should know better, or, that they're capable of more, or, whatever it might be. But I think it's so important, especially if we want to really build an intentional relationship between siblings, that we try to make an effort to see it from both perspectives. And again, I feel like this is kind of the theme of our conversation, but it just occurred to me as I said that also is a life skill, right? Seeing things from another perspective and not just your own. Your perspective is valid. What you're feeling is valid. What you're experiencing is valid and should be acknowledged. And there also is another person here, right? Both things can be true. So I think that, here are also opportunities for that. Baby sister is still learning and figuring it out. I also recognize that you're working really hard, and that probably was so disappointing and frustrating, right? So I think that that's really important. And whenever there's an opportunity to kind of come from, and this is true not just in play, this is just parenting, period. And it is a struggle. I try to practice what I preach. I'm also a human, and I don't always show up exactly the way I want to all the time. But I think that the more that we can come from a place of empathy, the more that we can come from a place of curiosity and not judgment, when it comes to our children, the more successful and calm and connected our environment at home will be. And that is true as these things come up in play, right? If I'm coming from a place of curiosity, I'm not immediately shutting it down, unless, of course, there's danger, right? That's a different category. But if I'm
Mm-hmm.
watching something, we're coming back to that toddler dumping everything out of the bin, right? If I'm watching this and I'm like kind of dying inside as I watch this mess happen before my eyes, and we've all been there. But I pause, right? I take a second and I come from a place of curiosity and not judgment. The curious part of me is going to be like, I wonder what they're like, what's up? Like, what are we doing
Mm-hmm.
here? Right. I can even ask that question. I'm noticing you're dumping everything out of your bins. I'm wondering what's going on. Right. And now, or maybe the curiosity doesn't come in actually saying it out anything out loud, but just watching it. And when we watch it for just even 30 seconds, we're like, oh, there's purpose here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm what immediately to me was like, oh gosh, no, stop. Now it's like actually, I'm seeing like there's something happening here, and she's engaged. She's involved. She's not, is this unsafe? Right? These are the questions I ask myself. Do I have to stop this? Is this definitely a no? These are the
Mm-hmm.
questions that I'd be encouraging parents to ask when it comes certainly to play, but really just period. Does it have to be a no? I don't know about you. I'm saying no all day,
Mm-hmm.
all day long. And it's exhausting. And if it's exhausting for me, I can only imagine what it feels like to my daughter to be hearing it all the time. So trying to come from this place of like, does it have to be a no? And sometimes it does, right? Safety, like there are certain things that is a non-negotiable. It's bedtime, right? Like, no, we're not having ice cream for dinner, whatever it is, right? Certain things are a no. But I think as parents, the biggest thing I see is shutting down things that maybe don't have to be shut down. And I think when we save our no's for when we need them, they become more meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
Our children are more likely to actually like heed that advice and heed those no's. It also is just more joyful for us. And I think that's a key part of getting through parenting is finding joy. And I think our children feel a lot more seen and understood. I'll just to give you an example from me personally. My daughter, this was now some time ago, but she was in her room and she had taken out quite literally every stuffed animal was like from their basket. They were all, and I was like, oh my God, like immediately just wanted them to be put away. Like it was just stuff everywhere. And she's taking them and she's like pulling out her diaper pail. So now like the reflexive no is like on the tip of my tongue because like we don't play with the diaper pail. Like the thing is like there are just so many reasons why this is a no. But I took the advice that I'm giving and I took a pause. And what I saw was there was like a whole thing happening. She's taking the stuffed animal one by one, bringing them to the diaper pail. And then she's moving the diaper pail, and the diaper pail is a train. And the train is going to the science center that's near where we live. And then they're getting off, and then a different stuffed animal is going on, and then they're coming back. There was a whole thing happening. And had I said no, I would have missed it. I would have missed this, what ended up being almost a half hour of engaged play that then gave me an opportunity to get something done that I needed to do for work. She would have missed this opportunity to work through all of these different things that she was doing. And in that instance, it didn't have to be a no. So I think my biggest piece of advice that kind of covers a lot of the different mistakes or difficult things that come up is just that coming from a place of curiosity and not judgment, wondering if it has to be a no, or is there a way to say yes to this, which sometimes requires some creativity on our part. And also we can bring our child into that problem solving. I want to let you do this, but this is not safe. So what can we do? I see that you're really enjoying the dumping. I can't let you take every book off of the bookshelf right now, but I can give you all of these blocks and these bags, and we can dump them in and out of the bags, right? I think that there's always kind of a way to find a solution, and that sometimes we just need to kind of take that pause and give the space to find it.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that a lot. It takes work and it takes thought because no is easy.
Yes.
And no is really for us in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And I think like my husband is just, I think, particularly good at the being creative about, okay, if she can't do this, what can she do?
Yes.
And so like just redirecting, if she picked up a rock and it's like, don't throw it, it's like, well, what can she do with that rock?
That's
or
right.
What,
yes.
What else? And so I try to
or what can she throw?
Yeah, what can she throw?
Right?
Or like, how do you turn the no that you want to say into a, well, how about this?
Yes.
Or,
hundred percent.
yeah, I'll be thinking a
100%,
lot about this
Kelly.
because I also don't want to like direct her and like
That's right.
instill like my
It's
thing.
hard
So
to
it's
find yes.
complicated.
It's really hard to find a balance. I think though you also are touching on something really important just behaviorally, particularly with young children, but really just children in general. It's like our brains are wired, even as adults, our brains are wired to like hear and listen to the thing that we hear. So if I'm saying like, stop running, like don't running, like what we hear is run. We hear running, right? So it's so how we phrase it if we want to see the result that we want to see is actually so important. So, stop running is so much better served when we say, walking feet or can you walk on your tiptoes? Or, how slowly can you walk? Right. So I think that like, kind of that focus on what the can and the yes serves us in so many different areas, not just play, but it's tricky. And you also don't want to, direct too much in another direction, which is why I think that problem solving thing of bringing them into it, that collaboration, that like, I won't let you throw a rock, but let's think together. What can you throw? What do we see around here that could be thrown? Do you see anything? Right. So now we're not solving it. We're pointing it kind of on the new road, but then they get to take it and kind of run with it in the next direction.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Thank you so much. There's been so much good stuff. Like I said, I'll be thinking about all of these things. And I know that you're providing a download that people can.
Yeah.
Can you talk just a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a free guide to independent play at any age with some of my tried and true tips. If this is something that you want to see more of at home, if it's something you're working on, but you need some support, it's a really great place to start. So I have a link that I provided to you, Kelly, that when you click, you can get it sent straight to your inbox.
Great. Yes. That's in the show notes along with, I know I talked about Jill's website, which has a lot of great resources and more information about her membership program and how you can work with her, as well as her Instagram handle. You can go follow her there at JillyBeansNYC. But this has been phenomenal. And I know, we talked a lot about toddlers because that's the age children that we have. But your resources do go up through elementary and beyond, as you mentioned, because all of these skills are life skills, not just play skills.
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you so much. This is great. And I can't wait for everybody to hear it.
Thank you so much.
Yep. Have a great day, everybody.
You too.
Thank you all so much for listening to this episode. It's truly an honor to help bring these conversations to you. I do have a couple of quick favors to ask of you. While you're listening to an episode, could you take a screenshot and post that to your Instagram stories and tag me at Life Intended Podcast? And just let me know what your favorite takeaways were or what you liked about the episode. It really helps me to learn more about what you love and want to see more of. And if you have a few extra minutes, if you'd go to iTunes or wherever you listen, I'd love it if you could leave me a rating and review. Ratings and reviews are one of the best ways new listeners can find the show, and I'd love nothing more to grow this and help more people live a life intended. See you again here next week.